Now to the parts you've been waiting for. Our keynote speaker for today will be Hanne Lindbæk. And if you people think you have seen pretty much anything with regards to experts in agile working, well, we have pulled some strings this time, I can tell you. Hanne will give us insights into the art of storytelling and how we can use it to change our working environments to the better. Not only Hanne has a strong footprint in acting and performing, but she's also one of Norway's leading communication experts. I mean, no wonder she knows how to incorporate storytelling into a business setting. Now, it might occur to you as an unbridgeable tension to move between being an actor on the one hand and a businesswoman on the other hand. But let me tell you that it's actually the spice that we've been looking for. And it also enhances credibility. Hanne, I personally admire you most for your vibrant personality and your ability to reinvent yourself iteratively. And this is also one of the core beliefs of agile working, isn't it? And with this, I would like to hand over to you. And dear all, please give Hanne a set of applause.
Well, Eva Maria, you get to introduce me every time. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, and so we begin. 22 years ago, my father came home from the US, where he was working at the time. He was working for the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and he told me a story of how his Norwegian presentation technique of the time didn't really cut it in the sophisticated corridors of the Washington, D.C. environment. So what happened was that my father at the time, this was very much the presentation skills of the 80s or the 90s in Norway. He was trying to be humble and he was trying to underplay his own status and he was trying to be all like, hello, hello, here I am, you know, trying to be all kind in a way. And the clash, the cultural clash with the communication style in Washington, D.C. was pretty enormous. The thing was, over there at the time, people below him in the system would already be taping themselves on video in order to create good presentation styles before they presented even to my dad. So it was a bit of a bizarre situation. My dad was taken aside and he was told that he was going to have a day with communication training. And my dad thought to himself, I'm such a busy man, that's not going to happen. It's going to be in my calendar, but then before the time actually arises, it's going to be scrapped from my calendar because I'm a busy, serious man. But no, the day came and went, and my dad was exposed to a gang of people, and they are called, ladies and gentlemen, the Actors Institute. So the Actors Institute, I think they work to this day. They are specialists in helping the lobbyists and the different organizations and the corporations of the Washington, D.C. area. And they are to this day the people who coach the people who do TED.com. Right? So the people who do the actual live conference in America, the people who get to do the .com stuff in TED, they are actually trained by these actors. So my dad comes home to Norway and he tells me this story. And as you said, Eva Marie, the idea was born actually for me to change my careers. But I didn't really know it at the time. Of course, we very rarely do we? To me, it was a way of investigating how I could use what I do for a living for other groups of people. It was also a means, because being an actress is pretty hard. There's a lot of hard work. And unless you're very, very famous, which I never have been, I've been a little bit famous, you end up kind of really having to hustle for your worth a lot of the time. And I wanted integrity. I wanted to be able to say no to the jobs I didn't want and to say yes to the ones I did want. So it's a value meeting also for me 22 years ago. But the rest is kind of history. This is just an introduction. And yes, 22 years later, we've had the delight and the pleasure of training people from more than 60 nations. We work regularly with like leadership development issues in both the UN and a cluster of other worldwide Fortune 500 countries, companies. We do a lot of like one-on-one coaching, and our big curiosity always is just how can we make you communicate well? When your communication is on purpose, when it's a tool, when it's at work, and you need it to be good. So here we are today, focusing on the idea of storytelling. Now, I wish we could have like a conversation, and we will when we get to the Q&A. But to start us off, it's like when I started out 22 years back, the idea of storytelling, narratives, dramaturgy was pretty hot, even in remote Norway, already then. But there was so much palaver around it that I personally was like, I can't really understand what's going on. It felt very much like a buzzword in the world of organization, in the world of organizations, and at least here in Norway. I mean, if I talk about an engineering company such as yourself, and then, of course, I don't know all the people who are external here today, but when we think about an engineering company at that time, there would be like a discrepancy between I think it's still there in many ways. We know that from a research point of view, it's probably smart to use stories and narratives. There's enough research now that supports it all. But the big gap, the big phenomenon is that we tend to still not use it. Right? Even though it's the rational thing, even though it's the smart thing, there's something holding us back from actually moving into using narratives. So today I thought I'd just very quickly show you how fashionable it is. There are very cool and trendy keynote speakers on our planet who use it very much, and they use it systematically. And there are very good reasons for it. I'll dive a little bit into the research because we need to understand that we're standing on firm ground as we move into like, why on earth should I change my way of communicating at work? If you are one of the people who are already using storytelling, I will take us through like the dramaturgy graph and explain how a good story is built up, and maybe you can get some new kernels of insight today, hopefully. And then I will also be talking about the how, because I find it one of the most important issues. I think we by now understand the why. Storytelling, well, it's just like this. Every piece of research that I've come across just completely supports the idea that out of everything you will remember from me this morning, you'll remember my dad and Washington, D.C., and the corridors. Maybe you had a corridor in your mind, I don't know, right? And you'll remember that better than all the facts and the figures that I will try to convey to you. Okay, so if that is our introduction, let's go in and have a look at the research. There's a general practitioner here in Norway. He's a doctor, and he has a story from his life when he was working as a general practitioner. When he was sitting around a table with a bunch of his colleagues at the end of one year. And I don't know if it's like that in Germany, but here in Norway, it's a terrible thing, really. You know, the medical consultants, the people who come to sell doctors, like get them to use their medicines or whatever, the commercial companies like GlaxoSmithKline or whatever. In Norway, if you're a general practitioner, you will have these salespeople come to you at lunch. And they very often serve you lunch as they try to pitch their medicines. So now you can imagine there's this group of like 10 doctors sitting around a table in their white coats, and they're going, oh God, all these medical consultants. Oh my God, there's so many of them, and they're all trying to push us medicines. And did you ever buy any one of them? And they start discussing around the table, and lo and behold, of course, out of a whole bunch of medical consultants, only 2 have been successful, but the 2 of them have sold medicines to all the doctors around the table without the doctors even consulting with each other. So now the doctors are like, this is interesting. Oh, okay, what's going on here? What are the common denominators in these 2 sales people pitching to the doctors? And you're guessing it by now. The common denominator, of course, was that both of these medical consultants had used a narrative in selling medicine. Now, using a story selling medicine, that is not difficult. What do? You go, here's the patient. His name is Frank. He was very ill. He got a medicine. He got well. You know, this is not very sophisticated storytelling. This is pretty basic. And the idea of the doctors being fooled by this was actually provocative to many of these highly educated, highly intellectual, highly academic, and very facts and figures oriented people. Right? So they decided to do what's now become a very famous study, which is they actually exposed themselves to 2 types of selling. So they made a kind of control group, and the control group was exposed to traditional sales, like facts and figures, and the convincing by numbers, which is what we all try to do in our lives. And the other group would be exposed to narratives and storytelling. And now they're measuring their brain activity to see what's going on. So they're trying not to fool themselves. You know, that's basically the core of the exercise. And lo and behold, they come out the other end And the people who had told stories and narratives, the brain exploded with frequency activity in like a rainbow style, while as opposed to the facts and figures bunch, where the brain activity is much smaller and the access to concentration actually goes away much quicker. These are depressing news to a bunch of academics and people who are raised in the art of facts and figures communication, right? But what we need to take on board is that our brains are hardwired for story. Now, this might be stuff you've heard from before, but let me just take one piece of American research to support us. There is a very, very cool American professor from the Stanford University. I advise you to check her out if you're curious about storytelling. Her name is Jennifer Oker. And she's a professor at Stanford in behavioral stuff, and she's a scientist. And her research proves that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts and figures. So it's frustrating but true. The idea of actually being able to get to a narrative within your numbers, very often in the corporate world when I train people, this is the way we roll. The numbers might be there. You might be talking about the third quarter results, right? Now, if we are storytellers, here's digging a little bit into the how can we make the third quarter results into a story? How can we do that? Here's a clue, and it's actually from the teachings of Jennifer Oker. We look for the people. You look for the people behind the story. You look for the people behind the numbers, the people who struggled to create the numbers. You look for the customers who are happy or unhappy with the experience they've had with the company, and thus the numbers are what they are. You look for the story of how people are going to use these numbers in the next quarter to be inspired by, right? So the idea of moving us into the how of storytelling has to do with human centricity. Always, always, always look for the human being in your world, and you will start to become a storyteller. It's the human-centric angle. I've still to hear anyone convince me of a story which isn't about humans. It could be about robots, I guess, but that's because we humanize robots. Okay, so far so good. So if we are standing on firm research feet, of course, the idea of storytelling magic is because the brain lights up in a whole different way, and we are enthusiastic. We want to hear more when we hear stories. When we hear figures and facts, sometimes we want to hear less. We're stressed out. We don't want to listen. So the entertainment value should also not be underestimated. Shall we then dive into the how of actually creating a good story? Allow me to share, if I can make this work for us. What you see before you has also been sent out to you, and it's I'm actually stealing here, as all good consultants should do, because this is, and it's a big steal, but the people I'm stealing from have also stolen it. So there you go. What you're looking at is actually 2,500-year-old wisdom. You would be recognizing, some of you who maybe studied rhetoric skills, the graph in the middle as the recognizable Aristotelian graph of dramaturgy. But the people I'm actually stealing it from today is not Aristotle, but it's the gazillion-dollar industry that is making a very, very good living out of storytelling. And we are hooked on it. We're customers, most of us. And I'm, of course, referring to the world of Netflix and HBO and all the television magic that is happening these days. This is actually not so much television, but film. It's Pixar. And what you see before you is how Pixar would actually teach you to pitch in the corporate world. I'll get back to the how of that one. But the idea of using stories to pitch when we are pitching our ideas, when we're trying to get it funds, when we're trying whatever, is, of course, again, going back to the memorabilities, it's a pretty smart thing to do. Any story comes in 3 very recognizable acts. This is, I must add immediately, in the Western tradition. If you look at storytelling, for instance, in like an Asian tradition, let's go to India and to the Mahabharata, for instance, it has a much more cyclical thing to it. And interestingly enough, indigenous people and their storytelling habits are also, like, reportedly also sometimes cyclical. in a way, maybe because you're sitting by the fireplace, you're sitting by the bonfire, and you have time to share stories that would be going through generations or that are epic in their outline. The Aristotelian version of storytelling is not cyclical, but it goes through this like 3-act movement that it goes through the whole time. So I thought we would talk about a film from Pixar. I don't know if you're customers of Pixar. I'm kind of presuming that we all are by this point, because we are. If I go to Toy Story or Finding Nemo, which I'm going to talk about, or there's like a little cluster of, whenever they come out, actually, the Inside Out film, they are like a phenomenon on the, like globally, I guess, at least in the West, where we digest and we share stories that have been written by these amazing people working at Pixar. So if we talk about the graph and we blend it with one of the stories that Pixar has so famously created, what is the first thing that happens in Finding Nemo? I'm taking us way back. It's a bit of a vintage film. I will help us through if you don't remember it. The first thing that happens in any good storytelling is that you describe and you land in a situation. So the classical one from fairy tales, which is what Pixar use in their pitch, is once upon a time, right? Once upon a time, in a country far, far away, there was a king and a queen who could have no children. This is famously the start of many fairy tales. It's also the start of the movie Shrek. So once upon a time establishes who, where, and when. So if I take us to Finding Nemo, what is it? There's a little clownfish. He's pretty cute. He's like a little boy clownfish. And then there's the father clownfish. And the two of them live out on a coral reef. And there's plenty of other like little fish and animals living in the sea around them. Beautiful, idyllic little place. And that is basically like the once upon a time as Finding Nemo starts. And for those of us who remember the film, of course, what you remember might not be this initial meeting. What you remember is the trouble, which you can probably see from the visualization lies in Act 2. Going back to Act 1, you have the father fish and the son fish, and the once upon a time is kind of established. Notice how quickly you can do that. When I told you of my father, all I had to do was 20 years ago, my father came back from, right? You don't need to spend a lot of time on establishing, but like we know by now, it's human-centric communication. You focus on a person, you tell people a little bit about that person so they can start imagining him or her, and off you go. Now, the second step in the first chapter of the Aristotelian graph has to do with, and this is Pixar special actually, establishing the way the world was before the trouble. So father fish and son fish, they live out on this little coral reef. They are the cute little beings that they are. But mother fish passed away just a few years ago. So father fish is actually a person in deep mourning. And what is he? He's a little bit extra protective over sunfish. So what you see in the beginning of the film is that every day when father fish follows son fish to school, the other fathers and mothers on the coral reef, they kind of leave and they say bye-bye, and the father fish hovers. He stays behind. He doesn't want to leave. And the reason for that, you very quickly understand, is because he's anxious to lose like the one thing he has left. It's a very human, it's a very emotional, and it's a very gripping story. And any good story does this. You are kind of hooked straight away. Right? So the hook in a good Pixar story, bam, it has to be there in chapter 1. And what is it you actually are waking up? You are waking up empathy. And for anyone who's experienced loss, whether it be the breakup of a relationship or the loss of a loved one, you are immediately kind of going, oh yeah, I get this one. In a way, we all kind of have a fear for losing the ones that we love. So once upon a time, and then everyday one, and then, of course, this is an epic story. The story of Finding Nemo is the story of a lot of epic phenomenons in the idea of being a human being. It's got to do with coming of age. It's got to do with facing your worst fear. It's got to do with everything that creates what is called in storytelling tradition, the hero's journey. The hero's journey is established in modern times. I mean, the hero's journey is what you see before you 2,500 years ago. But the hero's journey in modern times is defined by a guy whose name is Joseph Campbell. He's sadly passed away now, but he was a researcher of myths and legends. And very famously, which is why you see the little icon in chapter 2 of our little card, Joseph Campbell had written this like little piece of something on the idea of myths and legends and archetypes in myths and legends. And a young movie maker with no success yet actually picks it up in Hollywood. And what is his name? George Lucas. So Joseph Campbell and George Lucas develop the Star Wars universe together. And it's a very, very fascinating piece of work in terms of dramaturgy and storytelling and investigating the powers that lie within a good story. So Joseph Campbell famously has written a book called The Hero's Journey. And if you want to check it out, I would definitely go there. It deals with the archetypical stuff of a hero facing challenges. It's a very useful book for like also internalizing storytelling, which I'll get back to. Anyway, back to the clownfish. So what does happen? Well, the worst thing imaginable. Of course it does. The trouble starts. And you see the second act starting. And it's like, is it going to go well straight away? Nemo gets famously sucked into the ocean, lost at sea, help, big despair, right? And Father Fish, there's actually two heroes in Finding Nemo. Father Fish has no choice. He has to leave the comfortability of his anxious little home that he's tried to create, and he has to go into the big abyss, the big scary, scary world to try to get his son back. Now, if the story kind of went, and then they did that, and they went back to the coral reef, and they lived happily ever after. Can you hear how you're flattening the idea of what a good story is actually supposed to give you? The idea of going into trouble, facing trouble, coming out the other side and having conquered, having mastered, having won, having grown. It's very interesting, but the Aristotelian dramaturgy graph in that sense is actually a motivational speech from 2,500 years ago. It's going, you can get through the trouble, and as you come out the other end, you will have learnt. So it's a pretty big phenomenon describing the idea of actually mastering challenges in our lives. It's pretty deep. Anyway, so that's what Nemo and the dad are going through. And for those of us who remember, like, what is the darkness of the abyss? What's the worst point in chapter 2 for Nemo and his dad? Well, it's got to do with the dentist office. You are in Seattle, and Nemo has been sucked out of the ocean again altogether and is now in an aquarium in the dentist's office. And there's not a one of us who's not kind of going, oh my God, it's not going to work. They're not going to be able to get back together. It's lost. It's a lost case. And we are at a very interesting point in any dramaturgy, because the more you dare to drag me into the trouble and actually make me see the abyss of fear that lies below it, the more engaged I will be in seeing whether it goes well or not. So this is also why we have the icon of Darth Vader at the bottom of the graph. Can you guess why? Because when Joseph Campbell developed, and together with George Lucas, the Star Wars story, they didn't start with Luke Skywalker. No, what's his face? Luke, the character of the hero. They started with Darth. They created an oh so scary, unovercomable, absolutely incredibly frightening Darth Vader. And this, for those of you who are geeks and still following the universe, the idea of overcoming something that seems bigger than you is actually at the core of storytelling. And by creating a Darth and then creating a Luke who needs to grow through meeting the resistance he meets in his Darth Vader, that is actually the dynamic of Star Wars, to put it very, very simply. But we were on the clownfish. So what happens? The aquarium in the second act, of course, the heading in the pitch from Pixar is then suddenly one day. And that's the trouble moment that we all experience. Now, let me take you to a very different dimension in this little diagram and go, once upon a time, there was a small blue planet. And every day when they went to work, they used to go physically to work and sit in meeting rooms together. And then suddenly one day, there was a pandemic, right? And the interesting thing globally of how we dealt with that story, which is a common story for the whole human race, rarely enough. We have a couple of stories going right now. We have the climate change. We have the pandemic. We even have the disturbancy and the disruptions of war and everything that's going on around us. And the idea of the destabilization of going into the trouble, I don't know if you remember or if it was exactly the same in Germany, but here in Norway, we tried to fool ourselves into chapter 3, at least twice. I think there was a New Year's Eve where we were like, yay, the pandemic is over. And it really, really wasn't. There was 2-3 months more of like close down and all the troublesome stuff to go. But the idea of there having to be a happier ending, having to be a happier outcome, makes you crave for actually the third act to happen and to make us happy, to make the celebration take place. In Finding Nemo, you find the little clownfish diving back out from the sea, diving back out from the aquarium with the help of a pelican, as far as I remember. He comes back into the sea. He meets this gorgeous little goldfish that loses her memory the whole time. She becomes the follow-up thing, played by Ellen DeGeneres in the original, absolutely brilliantly. After a while, Nemo starts finding back to the coral reef, and lo and behold, so does Dad, and everyone survives. And if the graph was to depict this would like re-establish the status quo, and that is it. You would go the idea of the trouble, and then you would go back up to where the graph started. Why does the Aristotelian dramaturgy graph take us even higher? Well, it is, I've already said, there's a deep morale to storytelling, and it deals with the idea that when you come through trouble, you come out the other end, you have succeeded, you've gotten to a better place. So that's the final 3 steps of the dramaturgy graph goes because of that, and because of that, this is development or evolving of the characters. And finally, they come back together. Who comes back together? Nemo, if he was a human figure, he would go out as a little boy, he would come back with stubble on his cheek. He is a young man. Fatherfish has, through all the trouble he's been through, he comes back with the idea that, okay, I get it. I can't keep overprotecting my son. So I think what happens in season, or in the film 2, very, very quickly, is that the fatherfish actually gets a new girlfriend. He's moving on. He's gone through the trouble. And Sunfish starts opposing to his dad, and I think the last thing you see in the film is that he actually goes alone to the coral reef school in the morning. So that is taking you through the dramaturgy of one of these brilliant films that earns Pixar, and let's not forget this, just an incredible amount of money, right? These films, there's a reason why a whole batch of people can work on these films for years and years. I saw a documentary the other day where they are describing the story creators of Pixar are describing how they actually work. And what they actually do is they create all these fantasy animals, but the emotional quotient of the story has to do with things that happen in their own life. It's very interesting. So I don't know the actual story of Finding Nemo, but I saw the story of Monsters, Inc. And the guy who created Monsters, Inc., for those of you who know that film, it's basically about actually a monster becoming a father. There's a little girl involved. And the whole story was based on the very personal experience from the scriptwriter of becoming a dad and taking on the responsibility of being a father in your life. Now there's a story for you. Okay, so if these are our 3 chapters, this is a handout you're getting as well. Now remember, we've already established, super duper important to actually create stories and to follow the research line and start trying to become a storyteller. Now you know a little bit more about how a story is created. For those of you who knew this already, I hope there's some new inspiration in here. And let's now move to the how. Because of course, there's like a sense that storytelling, okay, I get it, Pixar movies, yeah, hey, fairy tale and fantasies, unicorns and all of that, brilliant. How do I do this in my everyday life? I will let you answer questions in not too long, but if I can take you to my personal experience, storytelling for me like it's already been said, I kind of created a new career for myself, very interestingly. But the idea of actually the inner and the outer phenomenons of storytelling allow me to go a little bit deep with you and say that, of course, this is pretty wild, but it's very true. Our lives, our careers, the development of our work teams, all of it is story, right? And not only that, but we influence our own life by actually believing we understand which story we're in. So I don't know if any of you are like this. I'm taking you way down deep now, but I can wake up in the morning, and if I'm feeling in a particularly bad or vulnerable mood, I can have a whole day which is pretty bad and vulnerable. And it's somehow because I'm convincing myself that I'm that type of person, and maybe that I feel a little bit sorry for myself. Can we establish the victim story together? When we feel hard done by, when the stress gets too much, when there's too much pandemic, too much sitting at home behind screens, too much instability in the world. And our response, a lot of teams out there are experiencing this these days. Our response is to kind of go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, well, I just have to carry on. Well, that is actually a story. It's a narrative. It's a story we are telling ourselves. And this takes me to the first way in which we can use storytelling at work. If we are leaders, if you have, or even if you are, as a matter of fact, a member of a team, if you are participating in influencing the story a team is telling about themselves, what story are you creating? As a leader, if I were to coach you, I would definitely help you define a good, thorough chapter 3. What is the happy outcome that we're looking for? And even if we don't know the happy outcome right now, because there's so much uncertainty around us and everything seems to be so changing, how can we still believe things are going to go okay? As a leader, I actually believe it's your job to believe it's going to go okay. I've met a lot of leaders who look at me and look at the graph and go, what if I don't believe? And my answer is kind of, change jobs. Find one where you actually have the faith and you can pull your people through. Nothing worse than leaders who are passive with us or inactive with us as we, oh, you like that one. Yeah, I know, but I do actually believe it. If you don't believe in a happy outcome, how can you possibly help your people through the trouble? Right? Now, also remembering when people are sitting in trouble, most of us are these days. Most of us are somehow on a level overwhelmed. Remembering that when you are in the darkness, it's very hard to see the third chapter. And the belief in getting there has to do with your personal growth. So there's a lot of leadership analogies and metaphors that you can actually apply to this little graph I've just shown you, and that helps you deal with situations. So if you're not in a victim story, if you're not going, oh my God, I feel so overwhelmed and everything's so crazy, then what can you be? Well, you can be in an overcomer story. It's a slightly different version, but it has the same twang and it's very closely related to the victim. When you are an overcomer, I don't know the German word for that, but what are you? You are someone who's pulled themselves together. You're not a victim anymore. You're a grown up, but you're doing the darn work and it's hard. It's tough and it exhausts you and you collapse in front of the television every night. But my God, you're going to do it because you are on the job. Can you feel how this is still a dark story? A lot of us go to overcomer energy in our world, and a lot of corporations feed on overcomer energy. A lot of the story of a corporation can be an overcomer energy, right? The markets are hard. Everything is hard. Numbers are going down, but we're going to do it. There can be good energy in that, but there can also be really difficult energy in that. If everything is hard and heavy, I always say this when I teach communication skills. I say, if you find yourself using the words should, must, and have to all the time in your presentations or communications, if you're constantly going, okay, guys, now we just have to do this by the end of next week, or we really should, if not, it's going to go really badly. Can you hear the storytelling in my choice of words? Now, if I just flip that and I take a good look at my chapter 3, okay, I want to achieve something cool. what if I describe chapter 3 to them? What if I say to my people, oh my God, imagine how cool it's going to be in 3 months' time when we're sitting here and we have achieved ABC. Right? So the perspective with which you can think about your verbal communication, of course, is also very closely related to storytelling, which is again linked to this inner mindset we have about what story are we telling ourselves. So as a leader, make darn sure that your story is thought through, that you see your goal, you see your premise. And I would even say, if you are just if you are a team member, do the same thing. And if you can't see the story, then ask for a story. What is going on here? What is the story we're seeing? Because everyone imagines a story, whether we like to or not. If I take you for a quick little move into the private world of your relationships back home, I have a guru in my life. Her name is Brené Brown. I sometimes feel if I was in the same country as her, I would be a stalker. If you haven't checked her out, she's a professor at Houston University. She's a researcher professor. She's phenomenal. Everything has to be on Excel sheets, and what she studies is vulnerability. But she has a famous saying where she says that she's made a rule at home with her partner that when they start arguing, she can argue, it's okay, but she has to start every sentence with a start of a sentence that goes like this. The story I am making up right now is that you didn't do your dishes and you never do your dishes. So the story that I'm making up right now is her recipe to actually diffuse the domestic trouble that we can get into as we start arguing. Because when you start arguing, there's a story going on in your head. And a conflict is actually a conflict of stories. Okay, so we have leadership. We have how to deal with the partner at home and also maybe how to deal with trouble in terms of conflicts at the workplace. Then there is, of course, we haven't mentioned it so much today, but like I've told you, it's very trendy to use narratives and stories when you communicate verbally with your people. So if you have an important presentation coming up, I know most of you are engineers and you're facts and figures people. I get it. And I get to be the artist. I get to be the other person. I get that. For me, it's probably easier to drop in and out of narratives. But my advice to you is go on a hero's journey and become a person who dares to start using stories. Because once you do that, you'll never turn back. So the way to do it, of course, in a corporate world is we mustn't ditch the facts and figures. They need to be there. And then you can it's like if you have a statement, it's like making a little visualization or drawing of your facts and figures. So the third quarter numbers are there. Of course they are. And you look at them and it's probably in an Excel. It's cool. It's fine. But you give me an example. You give me an anecdote. You give me something human-centric to make me remember the numbers. Okay? And then, of course, a good metaphor is in a way a story as well. So if I'm a financial advisor and I tell you I'm going to hold the finger on the pulse for the market for you, that will be me doing that. I will hold the finger on the pulse for the market for you. This is actually a metaphor, but immediately you would feel more secure than if I say so and so many of our clients are happy with the way we advise. Blah. Right? And then the idea, finally, of course, of understanding the idea of stories and concepts, I've actually, in a way, mentioned it, but I'll take it as a fourth dimension. There is a Swedish professor in Stockholm, from Stockholm Business School. His name is Patrick Regner, and he's high on life and high on himself in many ways. Apparently, he says, if I'm teaching you how to implement strategy, we're talking huge, big corporations. We're talking absolute 100% corporate world. If I'm teaching you how to incorporate a strategy, he says, I only need you for 1 day, and I only need to teach you one tool. And that tool is, you're getting it by now, storytelling. So all of us know the frustration of a good strategy being rolled out. And like there's, what is there? There's some great kind of writing going on. There's a couple of sentences. We are going to be the company in the world by 2025, whatever it is. The strategy dies unless you think of it as a story. Because what you need to do is sell your people the idea of that story. And then you need to start walking the story. And you need to not let go. I think it's part of the successful strategy implementations I've seen over the year. Definitely, there's a story, but not only that, but 2 years down the road, you can sit with the people and go, remember when we started? And now we're here. See the difference? So the continuance, the stayer possibility is also like a huge factor when it comes to strategy implementation. And it's one that can frustrate us so much. I don't know if you experienced a strategy implementation that kind of didn't work, that kind of just got lost, and then bam, there was a new one. There's nothing more demoralizing or exhausting, actually, than working under a strategy that is suddenly gone. Okay, I'm coming to the end. You have the handout card, and now I would love to have some interaction. So please, any questions you can think of, I will happily try to answer.
Well, first of all, sorry, Hanne, go on.
Yeah, give me an applause first. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Hanne. Thank you. That was a lot of fun and very inspiring. I mean, maybe some of the participants here also know I have this thing with theater and acting and stories and stuff like. So I personally am really into all that stuff. So thank you. A lot of fun for me, and hopefully for the people here joining as well. I see a lot of reactions, love and clap and everything. So that's great. All right. Now for the questions part. So Hanne, we have a bunch of questions here, and let's see how many we can go through. So the first question I have is actually very interesting. What is the dark side of storytelling when narratives become destructive? What are countermeasures, especially in agile companies?
Oh God, what an excellent question. I wish we could have a conversation right now and we could open up the room and discuss that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't mind if the person who raised this question, can open up their mic and say something, or
we could have a chat. Yeah, it's first of all, I think it's a brilliant place to look. And I think it's the same in relationships and in companies, that some of us are, without knowing it, we are destructive. And it's got to do with like if there's a victim narrative, like it's never going to work, right? If there's someone who's experienced several downfalls or several disasters, then their spirit or their guts isn't going to be on top. And how can you make them understand that they're actually influencing and taking the story in a bad direction? Well, as with the victim story, it's very interesting because most of us don't like victim communication. If I came to you and I was like, I'm so sad and they're so mean to me, and we tend to shy away from victim communication. We tend to be provoked by it in a way because we don't allow ourselves to go there. But if someone is really stuck in the victim, the hard job as a leader, of course, is very often to kind of go, darling, I sense there's real emotions and pain going on here. Take me there. Tell me what's going on. And actually to vent and let the person ventilate. And then maybe through ventilation, they will understand, yeah, I'm feeling pretty shitty about all this, aren't I? And then there can be a change, right? So sometimes we need to remember when people do the victim on us, we need to try and be patient and try and go behind the victim narrative. Yeah, I managed to stop.
Thank you, Hanne. We have a couple of more questions. And the next one coming up in the Slido would be, hang on. What is the most convenient method to start with storytelling and without having a training as a full-blown actor?
What is the best method? Sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Yeah, what's the best method to start with storytelling?
As with any change or behavioral change in life, guys, be kind on yourself. So don't demand that the next presentation is one big long narrative or story, or you're going to die, right? So how can you find a little micro story? And then start investigating how, if it's now, I'm assuming we're using it for presentation skills, right? So find a little micro story and prepare it really well so you are kind to yourself, so you feel safe and secure. The idea is to get good experiences that will make you dare to do it again, right? So make it short, make it sweet. And here's a little personal favorite of mine. Never, ever use the sentence, I have a story I want to tell you about this. I hate it when people kind of do like the headline, I'm going into storytelling. It's much more suave and cool and smooth to just kind of go, okay, so 20 years ago, my father came back. Just go into the story, right? And then you can start working seamlessly in and out of narrative. But be kind to yourself, make it a micro one, but start going there. Be courageous at the same time. And really prepare it well so that you feel good about delivering it. That's what you're after, good times, so you can do it again.
Thank you, Hanne. That actually reminded me of something in acting. You probably know this, obviously. We say show, don't tell, right? So don't tell that you're going to talk about storytelling, but go into storytelling, right? It's
an excellent rule also in the corporate world. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Hanne. So the next question we have is, would you have a wonderful example to transfer the storytelling to business? So for example, coaching a top leader on why Agile supports and it is valuable to go step towards transformation, even if it's a long and costly way. So could you give an example for us?
Yes. So, I think any top manager actually longs and yearns for an agile team, right? But getting there can be super hard. And so what is at the other end of agile, if we can call it fixed? If we look at like growth mindset and fixed mindset for a second, if we look at the opposite of agile, if it's static or fixed or I sense immediately that there could be a story where you would explain the danger of that. So very often, I've done this exercise with another telecom company. I'm so sorry, I've been unfaithful with another telecom company. But the exercise of here are two companies in 2025. One is called Fixed Telecom. Right? And the other one is called Agile Telecom, right? And then you kind of go, what is the story 3 years down the road? And you don't look at the possible happy outcome. You look now at the disaster, of course, right? What happens if we stay the way that we are? And especially in the telecom industry, as far as I've understood, the necessity for agility, actually the heroes are you. The enemy is the uncertain markets and everything that happens and everything you have to do to reinvent yourself. And the happy outcome is the future where you've managed to become that new entity, whatever it is. We might not even know what it is yet, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but it's future prospecting is also storytelling.
Thank you, Hanne. And we have an interesting question, and maybe the one who posted in the Slido might elaborate a little bit more on it. And the question is, what is your Agile morning routine?
Oh, me personally?
That's the question. So if the poser of the question could elaborate a little bit on that might help.
I put on makeup for about 2 hours. No. No. Okay, well, here goes. Then we could dive into this world. I actually attended a program last year, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to geek out in this direction. It's called the Inner MBA, and it's actually led by like Harvard, MIT. There's amazing speakers on there, but it was all about how can you employ meditation and mindfulness techniques in the corporate world. So I am proud to say, actually, because it's true, I've been doing it for more than a year now. Every morning when I wake up, I take away my pillows and I have my phone right next to me, we all do, and I put on a 10-minute meditation. So it's the first thing I do as I wake up is to kind of just be with whatever's here. I try, at least. This morning, I didn't do very well with my meditation because I was far too nervous about this. So I kept my mind kept going. But the idea of meditation is, of course, that training the mind to come back on to here and now. Just to put it very, so that is actually part of my agile morning. Of course, I also have the privilege of leading an incredibly agile life. In a way, our Ergo Ego company, the company name is Ergo Ego. And my company is sometimes nearly too agile, right? We are floating in space and we need to solidify. So the idea of more agility is not my challenge. Sometimes it's less. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Shah, I think we have time for another question, right?
Yes, we do have time for another question. And that would be, how do you foster a new skill you don't have yet?
Yes. To bottom line it, please always do that. Please keep fostering. I mean, if we're talking about agility, what's it going to be about? It's going to be, I mean, we even had this discussion in Deutsche Telekom that you can't actually call anyone experts anymore, because the word expert has actually reached its expiry date. The moment you feel you're an expert, that's fixed, that's dangerous. So being in constant development and having the mindset that you can throw away the knowledge of the past and bravely go into the knowledge of tomorrow without grieving, without feeling sorry for yourself, without going into a victim story, is pretty important stuff. So how do you approach a new subject? With the mindset of courage and the mindset of fun and the mindset of being curious about how you can apply yourself, I guess. And this is super hard. It's easy for me to say. Very hard when we are overwhelmed. Very hard when we are in a hard place. But still, actually, very often it can lead to good energy if you just start doing it. I would also apply, be kind to yourself. Don't demand too much of yourself. Set realistic goals. And then, like I've done now with my meditation, have the staying power to practice stuff over time. Don't give up. Stay with it. And then things will develop from there.
Thank you. Actually, if I'm just looking at the time, we do have another 5 minutes, so we can go on with a couple of more questions. If my clocks, all my clocks are correct, we do have a few more minutes.
Okie doke. Thank you for making me aware of that.
It's interesting how we've matured in the world of like doing this online speaking thing. When I gave my first speeches after the corona came, me and my company, we created this thing we call the first aid kit. I think we delivered for you as well. And we delivered free speeches to the companies that we knew and loved who were in trouble in terms of everyone having to be on Teams. So I remember giving speeches to like 200-300 people, and there was no reaction on my screen. And the applause was people logging off. And the exhaustion of that. So at least we've gotten better at that.
And Hanne, this actually fits fantastically to the next story that we have in the Slido, and that's how do you cope with drastic changes in your life?
Oh, God. I love your audience. I'm just going to stay on this. I'm not going to leave. I'll be a keynote speaker. This is fantastic. How do I deal with drastic change in my own life? Well, part one, and that's scary actually. I'm beginning to understand that it's going to be there. I think that at this moment in time, we are going through drastic change more often than before, and the destabilizing feeling is more often with us than it was before. And I think part of me has kind of gone into a place of like, this is a constant now. And dealing with it from there is much easier than if you make a huge big drama about it every time. So dealing with uncertainty, it's a huge topic. My number one answer, my number one remedy goes back to what I do every morning. Because when you practice something like meditation or something that gives you stillness or something that helps you just breathe over time, then we approach these challenges in a much more easy way. I'm also, because I've been teaching it for so many years, I'm kind of vitally interested in the stories I tell myself in my life. So if there's a big radical change coming up, if I'm on a good day, I might even remember to go, okay, what story am I making up right now? What flavor, what atmosphere does this story have? How can I work to make it a story where I believe there might be a good positive outcome from it? So in a way you can say, there won't always be meaning in the crises that we have to go through as human beings, but you can create meaning, right? You can create the meaning you can. Right. This is me on a good day. On a bad day, I'm all over the place.
Like all of us are humans, yeah. Right?
I'm headless chicken. I'm running around going, oh my God, you know, so yeah.
Thank you, Hanne. Actually, before we go on to the next question, I would just, I don't know if you have the chat window on as well, because Raphael said something which is very funny. So I would just say it here.
Yeah.
I would say, no, sorry, the one message before, which said, yes, I am just thinking maybe changing my title from digital expert to digital victim.
on that.
I thought that was hilarious.
I'm really considering doing that. And you know why? Because I don't want to remain on one point. Yeah.
Yeah.
In German, we say, don't have Stagnation. Don't remain on one point. You need to develop on your own. And actually, I'm not a digital expert. In real life, I can promise you, I'm not a digital expert because there's so much more that I need to learn and to understand that maybe I'm more a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. The more we know what we don't know, right?
Right.
Thank you. Well, I guess we are we coming to the end now? Or am I?
Yes, we are. One last question, Hanne, because if I may, just really last question. How would you connect storytelling with cognitive biases? That is, for example, related to Daniel Kahneman's famous book, Fast and Slow Thinking.
Yes.
So how would you connect storytelling to those biases?
Oh my God, that's a tricky one. I think, no, it's not really tricky, but I think when we think fast, when we are looking for quick solutions, which we do so much of our time because we're so overwhelmed, right? Then we are not looking for the flavors of the story. The stories become black and white. They become easy narratives. So it's like, who am I meeting today? Oh, 200 engineers. That's a crappy story, right? If I sit down and go, who are these people? That's going to be a much more many-flavored, longer thinking story. So I think that being mindful and also the idea of System 1 with Kahneman, if we go into System 1, we immediately assume and we adopt the stories without consciousness. So I guess it's a System 2 thing, isn't it? To kind of go, whoa, what story am I telling myself here? Yeah. So if you guys want a list of like recommendations, just of places where I go to find inspiration on all this stuff, I will send that to you as well. I don't think I've sent anyone. I can do that. And let me just finish by saying thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all your responses and everything.
Well, thank you from our side, Hanne.